June 23, 1974. The Memphis Mid-South Coliseum was packed with more than 12,000 people. They thought they'd come for an Elvis Presley concert, but midway through the set, the king called up a young rocker named Ozzy Osbourne. What came next didn't just stun, the arena echoed. Across music history, the humid Tennessee air clung to the walls of the Mid-South Coliseum on June 23, 1974. More than 12,000 people crowded shoulder to shoulder, hand-painted signs bobbing above heads like banners in battle. Some fans clutched bootleg cameras, their flashes already testing the patience of security guards. The air smelled of hairspray, sweat, and anticipation. At 8:12 p.m., the house lights dimmed. A single spotlight cut across the stage, igniting the rhinestones of Elvis Presley's white jumpsuit. Gasps surged like a tide. Elvis, slimmer than in his Vegas years, strode out with a practiced ease, scarf already hanging loose around his neck. He gave a slight nod to the orchestra pit, and the first notes of C.C. Rider rolled like thunder. The crowd roared back, a sound so immense it rattled the rafters. Linda Mae Johnson, a 24-year-old fan seated in row 9, would later say, "You couldn't hear yourself scream." The floor shook. It was like church and chaos in one. But there was something different in Elvis's eyes that night, restless, alive, as if the setlist itself couldn't contain him. Between songs, he kept scanning the wings of the stage. His band, veteran players like James Burton on guitar, exchanged puzzled looks. They knew the order of every song, every scripted cue. This wasn't it. Half an hour in, as the final chord of Polk Salad Annie echoed, Elvis took a slow breath and leaned into the microphone. The Coliseum, rowdy just a second before, began to hush. People leaned forward, sensing something unscripted was coming. Elvis never broke routine, Linda Mae recalled. So when he paused, we all held our breath. The king smiled faintly, as though he carried a secret no one else yet knew. His eyes flicked again to the side stage. Then, in a voice amplified by both the mic and decades of cultural authority, he spoke a single name. Ozzy. The Coliseum gasped, a sharp intake of collective confusion. Some clapped hesitantly, others exchanged bewildered stares. Ozzy Osbourne, 25, frontman of Black Sabbath. An entirely different world of sound and fury. The tension swelled like a held note. Would Elvis really bring him out here, in front of 12,000 of his own faithful? And then a shadow moved from the wings. The King of Rock had just summoned the Prince of Darkness. Memphis had no idea what would happen next. From the side stage emerged a figure few in that Memphis crowd expected. Ozzy Osbourne, Longley, 25 years old, hair hanging in long, uneven strands, wearing frayed bell-bottoms and a patterned shirt that looked like it had survived half a dozen pub gigs. Compared to Elvis's polished rhinestones, Ozzy looked like another universe had stumbled onto the Coliseum floor. The noise shifted instantly. At first, cheers from younger voices scattered in the back rows. Then came murmurs, puzzled laughter, and a few outright boos. Linda Mae Johnson remembered gripping her program, whispering to the woman beside her, "Is that the Sabbath man?" Yes, it was. Black Sabbath had carved a path in heavy riffs and shadowed lyrics music that unsettled many of Elvis's faithful. For fans raised on gospel harmonies and rockabilly hips, this intrusion felt like heresy. Ozzy blinked against the blinding spotlights, clearly overwhelmed. He wasn't in an English pub or a smoky club. He was standing beside the king of rock and roll in front of 12,000 skeptical eyes. His steps were hesitant, shuffling like a man trying not to disturb sacred ground. Elvis extended his hand. It was both invitation and test. Would Ozzy take it? Would the audience accept it? He did. Their handshake was awkward but undeniable. The flashbulbs popped like firecrackers, capturing 2 generations in a single frozen moment. Yet some fans still crossed their arms. A security guard named Harper, posted at the edge of the stage, later admitted, "We didn't know if folks would start throwing things." It was tense. Elvis let the tension breathe. He didn't speak immediately. He simply nodded toward the microphone in the center stand. A gesture as bold as it was dangerous. Ozzy leaned in. His thick Birmingham accent rolled across the speakers. "Good evening, Memphis." The words hung strangely formal, followed by a nervous laugh. A ripple of uneasy chuckles spread through the seats. But then Ozzy's voice shifted. "This man," he said, pointing at Elvis, "was the reason a kid like me ever dreamed of standing on a stage. If you cheered for him, you should know he opened the door for all of us." The crowd buzzed again. Some clapped. Others booed. The tension split the arena in half, as though 12,000 souls couldn't decide whether to crown this moment as respect or rebellion. And what about you? If you were there, would you have applauded the newcomer, or stayed silent, guarding the purity of your idol's stage? How do we react when 2 worlds collide, by closing off or leaning in with curiosity? Harper, the guard, swore he saw Elvis's shoulders relax, as if he'd been waiting for those words. But the audience hadn't relaxed at all. The atmosphere felt like a storm gathering, each cheer and jeer clashing like thunder. Ozzy, emboldened by the microphone in his hand, grinned. "Some of you think I don't belong here. Maybe I don't. But music isn't about fences, it's about bridges." The boldness startled even the band. James Burton glanced sideways, hands frozen on his guitar neck. The orchestra held back, waiting for Elvis's signal. This wasn't part of the script. The Colosseum seemed to contract, 12,000 bodies leaning inward, straining to hear what would happen next. The young rocker had taken his shot. Now all eyes turned to Elvis. Would the king silence him, reclaiming the stage, or would he allow the disruption to keep unfolding? And when Ozzy opened his mouth again, the arena went dead silent. The microphone trembled slightly in Ozzy Osbourne's hand. 12,000 pairs of eyes bore down on him, their anticipation hanging in the humid Memphis air. The arena had gone dead silent, save for the faint hum of amplifiers and the shuffle of restless feet on the bleachers. Ozzy cleared his throat, then broke the silence with a nervous chuckle. "I know I look out of place," he admitted, voice thick with his Birmingham drawl. Laughter rippled faintly, but it was nervous, uncertain. A few boos broke out from the upper levels. For Elvis's die-hard faithful, this moment felt like sacrilege. Another man holding the king's microphone, speaking to his congregation. But Ozzy pressed on. "I used to sit in my parents' flat, scratched up records spinning, and dream of this sound, this man." He gestured toward Elvis, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed loosely, expression unreadable. "You made us believe a boy with nothing could become something." The honesty disarmed some. Scattered applause rose, quickly smothered by shouts of disapproval. Harper, the security guard, tensed, eyes darting across the restless sea of fans. Would this crowd turn? He wondered. Then Ozzy's tone shifted. "But music's not meant to stay safe. You showed us how to shake the world, not protect it. That's what Sabbath is trying to do. Different sound, same fire." The words lit a spark. A chorus of boos collided with cheers until the building seemed to quake with contradiction. James Burton's guitar strap creaked as he shifted, his eyes flicking to Elvis, silently asking, "Do we shut this down?" And here lies the question for all of us. When the next generation steps forward, do we open the door or hold it shut? If you had been there, what choice would you have wanted Elvis to make? For a heartbeat, Elvis didn't move. He let the arena wrestle with itself. The applause, the gears, the murmurs, it all merged into a storm of divided loyalty. The king had never shared his pulpit like this. Ozzy, realizing the fragile line he was walking, tried to soften. He looked straight at Elvis. "Without you, there is no me. And I'll never forget that." A hush fell again, as if the crowd itself needed permission to breathe. Elvis tilted his head slightly, as though weighing 1,000 unspoken thoughts. He could reclaim the microphone. He could nod to the orchestra, drown Ozzy out, and keep the night under his command, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped closer. One slow stride that brought him within arm's reach. The crowd gasped. Linda Mae Johnson recalled, "We thought he was about to take the mic back, maybe even tell him off." You could feel everyone bracing for it. Security leaned forward, ready to intervene. The band stayed frozen. The fans clutched their programs, waiting for the king's verdict. And then, against every expectation, Elvis Presley smiled. Elvis Presley stood face to face with the young rocker. For a moment, the Memphis Coliseum held its breath. The king could have ended it with a glance, reclaimed the spotlight, and left Ozzy Osbourne as nothing more than a footnote in a tense evening. Instead, he did the opposite. Elvis leaned into the microphone. His voice, calm but firm, carried through the hall. "Tell M what's on your heart." The sentence landed like a drum beat. Short, unscripted, final. Ozzy froze. His lips parted, but no words came. The man who roared across Sabbath stages now stood speechless before 12,000 strangers. Elvis waited, expression soft but steady, granting him the silence he needed. That silence grew heavy, pressing down on the rafters, until Ozzy finally spoke. "I was a poor kid in Birmingham," he began, voice raw. "We didn't have much, just a radio, a few scratched-up records. Yours, Elvis. You were hope. I never thought I'd stand near you, much less on your stage." The confession cracked through the tension. Fans shifted in their seats, some wiping at their eyes, others still skeptical. Linda Mae Johnson whispered later, "It wasn't showmanship. It was real." Elvis nodded, his face softening. The lights glimmered against the rhinestones on his jumpsuit, and he extended his hand toward Ozzy once, again this time not as a challenge, but as an embrace. The audience felt the shift. Where there had been jeers, there was now stillness. Even Harper, the security guard, lowered his clenched fists. The band, sensing the change, loosened their grip on instruments. And here's the question for us. What does it mean when your hero hears you, truly listens, instead of silencing you? What courage does it take to speak, knowing the world might laugh or worse, reject you? Ozzy's eyes glistened under the harsh stage lights. He swallowed, then let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," he whispered, almost inaudible. The king smiled, and then, with emotion so unexpected that even his band blinked in disbelief, Elvis unclipped the microphone from its stand and placed it directly in Ozzy Osbourne's hands. Gasps echoed like a wave. Fans clutched each other's arms. A few cried out "no," while others shouted in astonishment. No one expected Elvis Presley to surrender his microphone to another singer. Least of all, a heavy metal frontman. For Elvis, it wasn't surrender. It was trust. And as Ozzy raised the microphone, trembling but determined, the crowd braced for a moment that would change forever how they remembered this night. Ozzy Osbourne stood trembling, Elvis Presley's microphone heavy in his hands. The Colosseum seemed suspended in time, 12,000 people waiting, breath caught in their throats. Even the hum of the amplifiers felt louder in the silence. For a moment, it looked as though Ozzy might bolt back into the shadows. But then he raised his chin. The first words left him shaky, uncertain, but familiar. Wise men say. The crowd gasped. He wasn't reaching for a Sabbath anthem of doom or fury. He was reaching for Elvis's own ballad, Can't Help Falling in Love. The opening lines hung fragile in the vast hall, raw and imperfect. A few fans chuckled, others clapped tentatively, but no one moved. Ozzy pushed through the nerves. His voice steadied, gaining power. By the second verse, it carried, echoing across the Colosseum like something both daring and deeply reverent. The fans who had booed earlier now sat stunned, caught in a moment they never imagined. And then it happened. Elvis stepped forward. His baritone rose beneath Ozzy's tenor, rich, commanding, filling every corner of the arena. Together, the King of Rock and the Prince of Darkness sang a duet no one could have scripted. The transformation was instant. The crowd leaped to its feet, a roar rising so loud it rattled the floorboards. Flashbulbs exploded, freezing the sight of Elvis and Ozzy shoulder to shoulder. Couples clutched each other, some weeping openly. James Burton added a gentle guitar riff, the orchestra swelling behind him, as though they, too, had been waiting for this impossible harmony. The two voices blended different timbres, different worlds, yet perfectly aligned in that moment. Linda Mae Johnson recalled, "I cried like a child." It wasn't just a song anymore. It was like watching a bridge being built, right there on stage. And here's the question for you. Can music bridge worlds that words cannot? When two opposites share a single melody, which do you remember, the sound or the feeling it leaves behind? The Colosseum had its answer. As the song reached its final refrain, the audience sang along, 12,000 voices lifting with the two on stage. It was no longer just an Elvis concert. It was communion. The last note faded. For a beat, there was silence, deep, reverent silence. Then, like thunder breaking, applause shook the building. People stamped their feet, screamed, sobbed, clapped until their palms stung. Ozzy lowered the microphone, tears welling. Elvis draped a white scarf round his shoulders, a symbolic blessing passed from one generation to the next. The young rocker's eyes widened, overwhelmed, as the scarf glowed under the spotlights. The ovation did not stop. Fans shouted both their names. Camera bulbs kept flashing, desperate to capture a moment that felt instantly legendary. The applause shook the building, but the legacy of that shared song was only beginning to ripple outward when the ovation finally ebbed. The Colosseum felt changed. Fans left that night clutching more than ticket stubs. They carried stories that would ripple through decades. Bootleggers outside sold cassettes with muffled audio of the duet, the hiss of cheap recorders barely concealing the roar of the crowd. Those tapes traveled from Memphis to record shops in London and Los Angeles, whispered about like forbidden treasure. Linda Mae Johnson, back in her modest apartment, replayed the moment in her mind. "I saw Elvis give his stage away," she told her friends. And Ozzy, He didn't just take it, he honored it, for years. She kept her wrinkled concert program framed on her wall, a relic of the night worlds collided. For Ozzy, the impact was personal and lasting. In later interviews, he recalled, "Elvis didn't have to let me sing. He could have thrown me off. But he didn't. That kindness, well, it stuck with me. Made me think about how I treated bands coming up after me. Those who toured with him in the 1980s often described unexpected generosity and echo. Perhaps of Memphis 1974, and the press, always hungry, seized on it. Local papers ran clippings. Elvis shares stage with young rocker. National magazines speculated whether the king was blessing a successor or courting controversy. Either way, the story spread. Decades later, in 1998, the Mid-South Coliseum unveiled a small plaque, nestled among tributes to famous sports games and civic events. One line stood out. Here, on June 23, 1974, Elvis Presley shared his microphone with Ozzy Osbourne. Tourists stopped to photograph it. Proof carved in bronze that the impossible duet had not been a fever dream. What about you? Can you think of one night, one choice, that redirected the path of your life? Would you recognize it as history in the moment, or only in the years that followed? The legacy lived not only in stone, but in memory. Fans who had once booed admitted years later that they had been moved, even changed. Younger generations discovered Elvis through Ozzy, and Sabbath fans found themselves revisiting the roots of rock in Presley's catalogue. James Burton, reflecting years afterward, summed it up. It wasn't about Elvis or Ozzy that night. It was about music proving it belonged to everyone. And so, the moment endured not as a clash, but as a covenant. A symbolic handoff across time, carried forward in stories, tapes, and the hearts of those lucky enough to be there. But the deepest legacy wasn't etched in bronze or replayed on tape, lived quietly, in the memory of those who saw kindness become history. In the end, that night in Memphis wasn't remembered as a clash of styles, but as a lesson in grace. Elvis Presley, at the height of his fame, chose not to guard his spotlight, but to share it. He showed that true greatness doesn't shrink when challenged, it expands when it lifts others. Ozzy Osbourne carried that moment with him, not just as a story to retell, but as a compass. The kindness he received became the kindness he extended, shaping his own legacy long after the lights dimmed on Elvis' single quotes. And for the fans, those 12,000 witnesses, the memory outlived the notes themselves. They told their children and grandchildren, "I was there the night Elvis gave away his microphone." It was a story less about celebrity and more about humanity, the courage to listen, the humility to share, the power to transform a stage into a bridge. Who have you lifted up? And who once lifted you? These questions echo longer than applause. In the silence after the song, Memphis learned that kindness can change forever how history is written. This story reminds us that true legends share their light instead of guarding it. If this moment moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder of kindness. And tell us in the comments who gave you a chance when you least expected it.